In your kitchen, there likely sits a small, unassuming spice. It smells of warmth, of holidays, of comfort. But this humble seed holds within it a history of unimaginable wealth, ruthless ambition, and shocking violence. It was a spice once worth more than its weight in gold. For control of this one spice, nutmeg, the world's first multinational corporation was born. Entire civilizations were massacred, and global empires clashed in a century-long struggle. It's a story that culminates in one of the most astonishing deals ever made: the island of Manhattan being traded for a tiny, nutmeg-producing rock on the other side of the world. Join us as we uncover the epic story of the Nutmeg Wars. Our story begins not in the tropics, but in the terrified cities of medieval Europe. During the era of the Black Death, nutmeg was not just a flavoring. It was considered a miracle drug, one of the only reputed protections against the plague. Its rarity and supposed medicinal properties made it astronomically valuable. For centuries, the origin of nutmeg was a closely guarded secret. Arab traders brought it overland via the Silk Road, weaving tales of mythical beasts and dangerous lands to protect their monopoly and inflate prices. Europeans knew only that it came from the Far East, a mysterious, almost magical place they called the Spice Islands. The truth was even more remote. Nutmeg and its sister spice mace grew nowhere else on Earth but on a tiny archipelago of 10 volcanic islands in the Banda Sea, part of modern-day Indonesia. The Banda Islands were the sole source, a geological and botanical miracle. The Bandanese people had for centuries run a prosperous and complex trading network of their own, governed by a council of elders known as the Orang Kaya. They traded their precious spices for food, cloth, and metals, living in a delicate balance with their unique environment. They were the gatekeepers of a global treasure, and they had no idea of the storm that was about to break upon their shores. At the dawn of the 17th century, a new power was rising in Europe, the Dutch Republic, fueled by maritime prowess and a revolutionary form of capitalism. They sought to dominate global trade. In 1602, they created a tool to achieve this: the Verenigde Oost-Indische Company, or the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. The VOC was unlike any company that had come before. It was the world's first publicly traded corporation, and it was granted extraordinary powers by the Dutch government. It could wage war, negotiate treaties, mint its own currency, and establish colonies. It was a company that acted like a state, and its primary objective was a total, brutal monopoly over the spice trade. After violently ousting their Portuguese rivals, the Dutch arrived in the Banda Islands with a fleet of warships. Their strategy was not one of free trade, but of forced contracts. They demanded the Bandanese sell their nutmeg exclusively to the VOC at a fixed, artificially low price. When the Bandanese elders, the Orang Kaya, resisted and continued to trade with their English rivals, the Dutch response was swift and brutal. They began to build massive stone forts on the islands, fortresses of greed designed to enforce their will through military might. The stage was set for a bloody confrontation. The arrival of the VOC marked the beginning of the end for the Bandanese way of life. The Dutch desire for a total monopoly would not be satisfied by contracts or forts alone. It would demand a final, terrible solution. If this story of how a simple spice-shaped global history has captured your imagination, I invite you to consider subscribing to the Dusty Codex. Your support is what allows us to bring these forgotten and often difficult histories to light. Before we delve into the darkest chapter of this story, I'm curious, what strikes you more about the VOC, their innovative corporate structure, or their ruthless, state-like power? Let me know in the quiet comments section below. In 1621, the VOC appointed a new governor-general who would change the fate of the Banda Islands forever. Jan Pieterszoon Coen. Coen was a brilliant administrator and a fervent believer in Dutch supremacy. He famously wrote to his directors, "We cannot make war without trade, nor trade without war." To him, the continued resistance of the Bandanese was an intolerable obstacle to profit. With a force of nearly 2,000 men, including Japanese mercenaries, Coen launched a systematic and brutal campaign of conquest. His goal was not subjugation, but depopulation. He intended to wipe the slate clean and replace the Bandanese with a workforce that he could control completely. What followed was a methodical genocide. The ruling Orang Kaya were captured and brutally executed. Villages were systematically burned to the ground. Thousands of Bandanese were killed in the fighting, while others starved to death hiding in the mountains or died in the sea trying to flee in their canoes. By the end of Coen's campaign, the Banda Islands were a ghost of their former selves. Of an original population estimated at 15,000, fewer than 1,000 remained. Most were enslaved and forced to work on the nutmeg plantations now owned and operated by Dutch overseers. The VOC had its monopoly, and it was written in blood. One small problem remained for the Dutch: the tiny, remote island of Run. A small band of English traders from the rival East India Company had established a foothold there, and the island's inhabitants had sworn allegiance to the English crown as long as the English held Run. The Dutch monopoly was incomplete. For years, the Dutch and English played a tense game of cat and mouse, with the Dutch blockading the island and the English desperately trying to supply it. This small rock became a focal point of global rivalry between two rising empires. The conflict over Run and other colonies eventually led to the Second Anglo-Dutch War. At the war's conclusion in 1667, the two nations signed the Treaty of Breda. The treaty involved a series of territorial swaps to bring about peace, leading to one of the most famous deals in history. The English agreed to give up their claim to the little island of Run, finally giving the Dutch their complete, bloody monopoly on nutmeg. In exchange, the Dutch ceded control of a remote, swampy, fur-trading outpost they held in North America. That outpost was called New Amsterdam. The English would rename it New York. The Dutch monopoly, for which they had sacrificed so much and committed such atrocities, lasted for over a century. But it was finally broken not by a rival company, but by a daring French adventurer named Pierre Poivre. In 1770, Pierre successfully smuggled nutmeg seedlings out of the Banda Islands. He transplanted them to the French colony of Mauritius, where they thrived. Soon, nutmeg was being cultivated in the Caribbean and other parts of the world. The price of the spice plummeted, and the Dutch monopoly was shattered forever. The bloody secret of the Banda Islands was finally out. The nutmeg wars are a powerful and often brutal reminder of how the modern world was forged. The quest for spices drove exploration, fueled colonialism, and gave birth to corporate power on a scale never before seen. It's a story of greed, violence, and the astonishing global connections that can be hidden within the most mundane of objects, even a simple spice resting in your kitchen cabinet.